Welcome to Created Healthy. I'm Dawn Combs. It's a common idea that God gave us everything we need in nature, but do we believe it enough to walk that out in truth? Often the very same people who say this go looking for answers on how to use food and medicine from man-made sources. Everything man creates comes with a user's manual. Why would God be any different? I challenge you to join me in seeking revelation about our body, mind, soul, and spirit health by digging into His written word and in practicing pure science in the visible world of His creation. Did Judas intend to kill Jesus? I think the reading here in Matthew 26 through 28 for me is a lot about unintended consequences, and I want to look at three of the leading men in this passage: Judas, Jesus, and Pilate. So when we start out in these chapters, the chief priests and elders have gathered together. They're finally all talking, and they meet at Caiaphas's house, and they plot to kill Jesus. Just not on Passover. They think that would be a bad idea. There is a meanwhile in another city. We've got Jesus having dinner with a number of people and his disciples among them. And as he's sitting, a woman comes along and she uses an incredibly expensive perfumed oil to anoint his head. And it specifically mentions that the disciples kind of have a fit about the waste. And this woman is using something that could have been sold to feed so many poor people. And they're caught up in doing good. And Jesus says, no, it's fine. This is a really important part of preparing for my burial. People will hear about this woman throughout time and the kindness she's shown here. But I have always wondered about this moment, why it was mentioned and why it mattered that the disciples got so angry. I think that it is significant that right after this, Judas goes out and finds those that are plotting against Jesus and commits to betraying him and gets his 30 pieces of silver out of the deal. I think right after this moment, I feel like it's possible that Judas was really disgusted with how Jesus continued to, maybe he didn't fully understand. He thought he did, but he didn't completely understand Jesus' mission and what he was up to. And he didn't believe, if I'm correct, he didn't believe Jesus telling them that he was about to be killed. I think if I put myself in Judas's position, he got fed up and angry that all of this waste, maybe Judas really cared about money. Maybe he was somebody like myself who really cares about efficiency and doing things the best way. And he saw Jesus throwing away money and not taking care of the poor and not actually doing good works. And I feel like in this moment, because the stories are right after one another, that they're important and they're connected, that this is where Judas just said, that's it. I'm going to get him punished. I'm going to get his head screwed on straight. And he goes and he betrays him. The Passover meal happens, and this is the meal in the upper room, the Last Supper. And Jesus says, somebody here will betray me, and Peter, you will deny me. And Peter denies that he'll ever deny Jesus. Right after that, they go to the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus goes and he prays, and he's really struggling with what he knows is about to happen in his humanness, and knows how difficult it's going to be and how painful. And the disciples fall asleep on him, and here we go. Judas betrays Jesus. He comes back with the mob, and he kisses Jesus on the cheek and identifies him, and they seize him and they haul him away. Peter follows along, of course, and denies him in the courtyard. He is so curious and he wants to be there to support his friend and his teacher, but he's also too scared to admit that he is there for Jesus with all of these other people. He doesn't know who to trust. And Judas, though, after this, I think when he realizes what is happening, when he realizes the trajectory that his influence has created, regrets what he has done. We are told that he throws away the money into the temple that he had gotten, and he goes away and he hangs himself. And I think he is so distraught over the unintended consequences of perhaps him trying to show Jesus, give him a lesson, get him back on track, jolt him, shock him. Whatever he was trying to accomplish was perhaps different than what actually occurred. And it's only now that he believes Jesus and he sees the signs and he understands that he has played the part in Jesus going to the cross, and it's more than he can bear. So Jesus comes, and of course the money, which is interesting, the money gets used to build Potter's Field, which is where people would be buried who otherwise didn't have the money. Jesus goes before Pilate, and here is where the actions of Jesus really stand out for me. We're told that Pilate questions him, and Jesus doesn't really put up a defense. He's not outwardly claiming anything. When Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" he says, "It's as you say. It's whatever you're saying. I'm going along." And it struck me as I read this, thinking about unintended consequences. I think Jesus is avoiding unintended consequences here. I spoke recently with one of my students, and we were talking about really giving up your life and really letting go of control over how things were going to unfold. And I see in this moment Jesus knowing what God's will is and knowing what needs to happen, and he is just going along for the ride. So he is being careful not to say anything that might change the course of what God has planned here. He really has just given up himself into the flow of what God has planned, and he's trying not to accidentally divert one way or the other. And I think that's really beautiful. I think it is, it's frightening to think about being caught in the hands of the Romans and knowing that so many people are out for your blood and knowing what God has asked him to do. How terrifying it would be to completely give up any control over the situation, to not only give up control and accept, but also be swept along without trying to. I kind of feel like it's like being caught in a current and just going limp and floating instead of grasping at sticks and shrubs and the soil along the bank, but really just going limp and allowing God's will to carry him here so that he doesn't create anything of his own will. And what a beautiful example in the face of the worst outcome. It kind of makes you feel like, you know, with your next job or your next home, that you could probably just go limp in the current of God's will and wind up where he intends you to be, because it's probably going to be somewhere good. You aren't going to wind up on a cross. So Pilate can identify here that Jesus is wrongly accused right off the bat. It's obvious that there's just a sweep of emotions that's brought him here. And so he tries to give people a chance. He tries to give those that are speaking out against Jesus and the mob that's created, tries to give them a chance to call it back. And so he puts a known, troubled criminal up next to Jesus and says, "I'll release one of these, you choose." And they choose Barabbas. Jesus is scourged before he is then sent to crucify. And while Pilate is questioning him, Jesus doesn't even answer the priests when they're questioning him. Pilate visibly in front of the crowd takes water and washes his hands. And I think this is a moment too of Pilate realizing that he is swept up in a current. He knows that Jesus is wrongly accused, but he sees that I'm sure he sees political impossibilities of him going against the chief priests who have all of the money. They are the aristocracy. He sees the futility of him trying to argue or stop this, but his wife has already warned him, and his own intuition has warned him that this is a bad scene to be anywhere near or part of. And so in front of everybody, he washes his hands, and he says, from this point on, it is going to be your will as a crowd, as the priests. I am merely something caught in the stream. I am not willfully doing anything anymore because this is all on you. His blood is on you. I will not hold an innocent man to my family's DNA and carrying that trauma and that guilt from here on. So I see Pilate, that second figure here, in realizing that there is a greater will that is happening, and he's not grasping along the string bed trying to stop the current. He's just going limp and going through that current. And in his way, he plays a part in God's will here, not causing anything to interrupt what is needing to happen to save us all. God's original intention for Jesus to be here and do his ministry at all. So the crucifixion happens. Jesus is mocked. This is where we see he's put into a scarlet robe, and the crown of thorns is crushed on his head so that he's bleeding and suffering. Let me tell you, that thorn, it is believed that it is the hawthorn tree. And if you've ever been poked by a hawthorn thorn, it doesn't just hurt because you got stabbed. There's a toxin that's on it that causes immense excruciating pain wherever the thorn broke the skin. And so this hurts because he's been wounded, but the wounds themselves would have been very painful. He is given a reed to hold for his staff, and he is mocked as the King of the Jews. And when he gets nailed to the cross, they further put up a sign because they fully intend for his body to hang there until it rots away and they can toss it into a ditch afterwards. They put up a sign to mock this as well, King of the Jews. The crucifixion process is terrible, and it has been studied at length. He's given a wine to drink with gall as he's hanging there, and after tasting it, he refuses to drink anymore. His clothes are cast; they're divided up by lots. All of these things are fulfilling prophecy. The sign above his head, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews. From the 6th hour to the 9th hour, there is darkness that falls. And in the 9th hour, he calls out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And after that, he dies. His spirit is given up. None of his bones were broken. It was practice at this time to break the legs of somebody on the cross because you could lift yourself up again and again as long as your legs were whole, trying to get air into your lungs, because the way that you're stretched out on the cross diminished your ability to breathe properly. So they would crush the legs so that they couldn't lift themselves up and they suffocated faster. They did not do that with Jesus. He died before it came to that. At the moment of his death, the veil in the temple, this horrendously thick, ridiculously impossible to tear veil, was ripped from top to bottom. There was an earthquake. We're told that saints are raised. Mary Magdalene and Mary, who is the mother to James and Joseph, the disciples were there. Joseph of Arimathea comes in the evening and asks Pilate for the body, and instead of it being on the cross, hanging there for dogs to eat and birds to eat, Joseph of Arimathea makes sure that he gets a proper Jewish burial and he gets put into the tomb. The chief priests and Pharisees realize, hey, wait a minute, the disciples have been talking and Jesus has been talking about he'll raise in 3 days, so we need guards on the tomb so that the disciples don't come and make a lie out of this. On the morning of the Sabbath in 3 days, the Marys go to look at the grave, and earthquakes have happened, and the stone that was rolled over the tomb has been rolled away, and the angel of the Lord is sitting there. And this scares the pants off of the guards, who run and tell their story, and they become the subject. They are bribed to tell the story that the disciples indeed did come and take the body, and they're told that they will have protection from officials from not doing their job. And Jesus appears to the Marys on the road, and he tells them not to be afraid, but to go tell his disciples to meet him into Galilee. And we get the Great Commission here. So I think about what it is like to accept God's will, to look for God's will in our lives, to pray for it and to ask for wisdom to see it. Sometimes we're carried along and we don't know where the tide is taking us. I've lived that a lot. But to give in and not cause unintended consequences, to not cause more of a route than we need to take. If we go limp in the current, God takes us directly to where he wants us to be. If we try to save ourselves, if we try to act out, we see this with Sarah and Abraham. If we try to make something happen because we don't trust that God's current will carry us to where he promised it would take us, we cause just immense amounts of damage and detour to what God's purpose is. And I think one of the most beautiful things in this telling of Jesus's crucifixion in Matthew, for me, is that evidence of how Jesus just floated through the current and allowed everything to happen to him because he was following God's will. And what a temptation, I know, in the simple things in my life, to cast my arms out and save myself or stop what is happening because I might have a better way or I might be able to do something different. The temptation must have been there in his flesh. And what a beautiful example for us. I pray that God is blessing you today, drawing you closer, encouraging you to trust him and go limp in the current of his will, so that it gets carried, so that you get carried to the best of the things that he has for you. And I pray that he brings you back here to study with me again tomorrow. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with a friend. And I'm always interested in hearing what God is laying on your heart. So drop me a rating or review, or join the conversation on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube at Dawn Combs Really.